Hello and welcome back. By now, you feel it, don't you? That sense that something has shifted, not ended, just moved out of sight. An arrest has been made. The city is exhaling. Order is congratulating itself. But some endings are lies we tell ourselves, because the alternative is harder to live with. Burrabazar believes it's safe now. And that belief is exactly what makes it vulnerable. You're listening to Vixen Beyond the Veil. This is The Butcher of Burrabazar, Part 4. When the wrong one is caged. Stay with me, because what comes next isn't about justice. It's about what the world chooses to live with once the veil has been disturbed. For a brief and dangerously convincing moment, the city believed it was safe. The headlines softened, speculation dulled into reassurance, and Burrabazar resumed its familiar rhythm with the gratitude of a place that had learned, over centuries, how to swallow fear and keep moving. Shops stayed open later again, tea stalls grew louder, and people began saying it's over with the careful optimism of those who desperately wanted to believe it. Rhea watched all of this from her office window, arms folded, jaw tight. A junior officer stood behind her, trying for lightness as he said,
They're already celebrating. Guess we did something right.
Rhea didn't turn.
Cities celebrate too early.
She said evenly.
They always have.
Commendations came quietly from above. Measured praise and clean acknowledgements of procedure followed and pressure handled. And she accepted them with the same discipline she applied to everything else, because this was how order was meant to work. A suspect had been arrested, evidence logged, the system had done its job. And yet her fingers lingered on the glass longer than necessary, as if she were waiting for the city to contradict itself. Arin felt none of that relief. He moved through the city with the uncomfortable awareness of someone who had already stepped past a line most people didn't know existed. Rudra's words replaying in his head until they stopped sounding strange and began sounding inevitable. When the fourth body was found, the call didn't come from the newsroom. It came from Rhea, with no details, no explanations, just an address and a pause heavy enough to mean something had broken. When Arin reached the scene, the first thing he noticed was what wasn't there. No restraint, no symmetry, no patience.
This is different,
He muttered, crouching near the markings. Rhea stood beside him, eyes sharp, scanning everything at once.
This is rage.
She said.
Or arrogance.
or both.
Arin replied. She glanced at him.
You're not supposed to sound relieved.
I'm not.
He said quietly.
I'm terrified.
She looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time since they'd met, her expression softened into something dangerously close to exhaustion.
You were right.
About?
About him. About all of it.
There was no apology in her voice, and no pride either, just truth, raw and unwieldy. He exhaled slowly.
That doesn't make me feel better.
Good. It shouldn't.
They stood there for a moment, the city breathing around them, and something shifted between them. Not attraction, and not comfort, but trust. The kind forged when two people finally stop pretending they're standing on opposite sides of the same problem. Rudra listened to the news without surprise, seated across from them in a secured room far from cameras.
So,
He said calmly.
He's escalated.
Rhea crossed her arms.
You don't get to sound vindicated.
I'm not. I'm concerned.
Arin frowned.
You knew this would happen.
I feared it.
Rudra corrected.
There's a difference.
Rhea slid a file across the table.
You're being released. Temporarily. Off the record. No deviations, no disappearing acts. And if this goes wrong,
You'll put me back.
Rudra finished.
Or worse.
She met his gaze.
glad we're clear.
They did not shake hands. They did not agree, but they moved forward anyway. It was past midnight when Arin returned to the newsroom. The lights dimmed, most desks abandoned, the building breathing quietly, and that was when he heard it. A low hum that was neither electrical nor mechanical. Something older, something deliberate.
Gopalda?
Arin called. The records room door was ajar, and inside, files hovered midair, not scattered or chaotic, but arranged, ink glowing faintly along their spines as letters shifted and rewrote themselves. Gopalda stood at the center of it all, room forgotten, eyes closed, fingers moving as though conducting something only he could hear. Arin froze.
I'm dreaming.
Gopalda opened one eye.
No,
He said gently.
you're finally paying attention.
The files settled, silence rushing in behind them.
You weren't supposed to see that yet. But then again, nothing is on schedule anymore.
Arin swallowed hard.
You're not human.
Gopalda smiled, tired and ancient.
Not for a very long time.
Who are you?
He hesitated, then bowed his head slightly.
Once, I was called Smriti Deva, keeper of records, witness to wars people now call myths.
Of course you're a god. Of course.
Smriti Deva rested a hand on his shoulder.
We did not disappear, Arin. We learned restraint.
The next place Rudra took them was not marked on any map that mattered. They followed him through lanes that narrowed into anonymity, past shuttered shops and buildings that had been renovated too many times to remember their original purpose, until Rudra stopped before a door so unremarkable it felt deliberately forgettable. He hesitated there just long enough for Arin to notice.
You trust this man?
Rhea said quietly, more statement than question.
I trust his memory,
Rudra replied.
which is rarer.
Inside, the space unfolded into a library that smelled of dust, ink, and something faintly metallic, as though time itself had been shelved and left to oxidize. Books were stacked in careful disorder, manuscripts piled beside ledgers that looked too old to survive the humidity. And at the center of it all sat a man who looked up from his reading as though he had been expecting them, though his expression suggested mild disappointment rather than surprise.
You're late.
He said mildly. Rudra exhaled through his nose.
You always say that.
The man's gaze drifted past him then, settling on Arin and Rhea with quiet appraisal.
Humans. How refreshing.
Rhea arched a brow, unimpressed.
You all talk like this?
A corner of the man's mouth twitched.
Only when the world starts repeating itself.
He closed the book he'd been reading with deliberate care and rose to his feet.
Devdatta Iyer.
He said aloud, then added almost as an afterthought.
Though that name is more habit than truth. I was Vedhakar once, keeper of histories that were never meant to survive peace.
Arin felt a strange thrill move through him at the words, awe threading into fear in equal measure, while beside him, Rhea folded her arms, her posture rigid with controlled skepticism.
And you called us here because...
Because you arrested the wrong one,
Vedhakar replied calmly.
and because someone else is very deliberately announcing himself.
Rudra stiffened.
You know who it is.
I know what he is.
Vedhakar corrected. He turned toward a shelf Arin hadn't noticed before, tracing a finger along its spine as though following a memory rather than a title.
A Rakshas who believed the accord was a mistake even before the ink had dried. That hiding made us smaller. That restraint was decay.
Rudra's jaw tightened.
He was imprisoned.
Yes,
Vedhakar said without looking at him.
long ago. Locked away in a divine prison when he refused to abide by the terms the rest of us accepted. Not out of mercy, but necessity. He was too disruptive to be allowed to roam freely, and too dangerous to destroy outright.
Kal Bhairav.
Rudra said slowly, testing the name as though it carried weight he was only just beginning to feel. Vedhakar nodded.
He reclaimed it recently, after he broke free. He wants it remembered. He wants the world to say his name again.
Rhea scoffed softly.
You're telling me this killer has ideology.
I'm telling you that extremists don't fear death. They fear irrelevance.
Arin leaned forward despite himself.
So he's not killing randomly.
No, he's killing selectively. Those who adapted. Those who chose survival over supremacy. Each death is a provocation, a declaration that the prison failed and the accord was a lie.
Rhea shook her head.
This still doesn't explain how you expect me to accept any of this as reality.
Vedhakar looked at her with something like sympathy.
It doesn't. It explains why reality no longer requires your acceptance.
The hunt that followed was swift and unnervingly quiet. Rhea moved through it with professional precision, coordinating resources she didn't need to explain, issuing orders that bent protocol without breaking it, her skepticism intact but no longer obstructive, while Rudra guided them with the certainty of someone who knew exactly what kind of creature they were chasing. Arin followed patterns no map could show, recognizing how human habits intersected with ancient intent, how myth had learned to wear modern schedules and alleyways like a second skin. At one point in the darkness, Rhea's hand brushed his. She didn't pull away.
Still think this is impractical?
Arin whispered. She smirked faintly.
Still think I'm boring?
Never.
He said, and meant it. They found Kal Bhairav where the city thinned into neglect, in a half-demolished warehouse at the edge of the river where construction had stalled long enough for shadows to take ownership. The air there felt wrong, dense in a way Arin had begun to recognize, as though the place itself had been holding its breath for centuries and was finally allowed to exhale. Rhea signaled her team to stay back, her instincts sharp enough now to know that uniforms and firearms were not only useless here, but actively unwelcome, while Rudra stepped forward without hesitation, his presence altering the space around him in a way that made the walls seem to lean inward, listening. Kal Bhairav was waiting. He stood amid the debris with a posture that was almost reverent, blood drawing dark along his hands, his expression alight with something dangerously close to joy, and when he saw Rudra, his mouth split into a grin that carried far too many centuries of contempt.
So,
He said, his voice echoing unnaturally in the hollow space.
they finally let the traitor out of his cage.
Rhea's grip tightened on her weapon despite knowing it was meaningless. while Arin felt a chill crawl up his spine, not from fear alone, but from the clarity of intent radiating from the being before them.
You were warned.
Rudra said calmly.
You were given a choice.
Kal Bhairav laughed, the sound harsh and delighted.
Choice?
He spat.
You call hiding among mortals a choice. You bent your knee to an accord written by cowards who mistook exhaustion for wisdom.
His gaze flicked briefly to Arin and Rhea.
And now you fight beside them. You shame us.
You were imprisoned because you refused restraint. Because you mistook supremacy for purpose.
I was imprisoned because I refused to forget who we were. Because I would not pretend we were small.
Kal Bhairav snapped, stepping closer, the air vibrating with his anger. His eyes burned as he looked past Rudra toward the city beyond.
They should remember us, fear us. These deaths were a reminder.
Rhea stepped forward despite herself.
People died.
She said sharply.
Innocence.
Kal Bhairav's smile widened.
Collateral.
He said, almost fondly.
History is built on it.
That was when Rudra moved. There were no incantations, no spectacle, only motion too precise to follow. A shift in the air that felt like pressure suddenly released. And when it was over, Kal Bhairav was on his knees, fury giving way to something like disbelief as restraints older than language itself wrapped around him, glowing faintly, pulsing with a rhythm that did not belong to this world.
You always did lack patience, and patience is the only thing eternity rewards.
The presence that followed arrived without sound. Figures stepped out of the air itself, their forms indistinct, cloaked in something that resisted focus. Not the gods of legend, but their functionaries. Enforcers whose divinity felt administrative rather than grand. And yet, the weight of them pressed down on the space with undeniable authority. Arin felt his breath catch, his vision blurring at the edges as if his mind was struggling to process something it was never meant to catalogue.
Kal Bhairav.
One of them intoned, voice layered and distant.
You are to be returned.
Rhea watched them, jaw tight, every instinct screaming to catalogue, to document, to understand, and failing utterly at all three.
I'm never putting this in a report.
She muttered under her breath. Arin smiled faintly, not taking his eyes off the scene.
Good. I wouldn't believe it if I read it.
Kal Bhairav snarled as the restraints tightened, his gaze locked on Rudra.
You think this ends it? There will be others.
There always are.
Rudra replied and stepped forward as the enforcers began to fold reality around them. Space bending like fabric drawn through a ring. He turned once, meeting Arin's eyes with something like apology, and Rhea's with something like respect.
The accord still stands.
He said simply.
For now.
And then they were gone. The warehouse stood silent once more, empty in a way that felt newly earned, and Rhea exhaled slowly, the weight of everything she could never explain settling heavily on her shoulders, while Arin stared at the place where the world had briefly opened and closed again, knowing with absolute certainty that this was not the end, only a pause. The official story that followed was clean and efficient. A human culprit, a convenient lie, a version of events the city could live with. Later, exhaustion won, and Rhea leaned briefly against Arin's shoulder.
Don't get used to this.
She murmured. He smiled.
Too late.
Normalcy returned the way it always did, quietly, almost apologetically. The city stitched itself back together with remarkable efficiency. the lie they had all agreed upon settling neatly into official records and public memory, and Burrabazar slipped back into its old habits with the stubborn resilience of a place that refused to dwell too long on blood once it had dried. The murders became anecdotes, then footnotes, then cautionary references stripped off their teeth, and life resumed its unremarkable forward motion. Arin and Rhea let it happen. They did not talk about the council. They did not revisit the night the world had bent and folded itself away. Instead, they learned how to exist in the quieter aftermath, discovering, somewhat to their mutual surprise, that silence was easier to share than either of them had expected. Dating was not announced or formalized. It simply began, tentative at first, then steadier, built on shared meals after long days, and conversations that drifted easily between work and everything they avoided naming. Movie nights happened irregularly, never planned too far in advance, because both of them carried schedules that refused predictability. And on one such evening, they had abandoned the idea of seriousness altogether, sprawled across the couch with a half-forgotten film playing softly in the background. Rhea had kicked off her shoes. Arin's notebook lay closed and ignored on the table, and for once, the world felt manageable in its smallness. The knock came just as the credits began to roll. Rhea stilled. Arin glanced at her, then toward the door.
You expecting someone?
She shook her head slowly.
No.
Rudra stood in the hallway when Arin opened the door, looking exactly as he always did, calm, composed, unchanged by time. And his eyes flicked briefly between the two of them before a faint smile touched his mouth, neither surprised nor amused.
You look settled.
He observed. Rhea crossed her arms.
You didn't come for small talk.
Rudra's smile faded just enough to confirm her suspicion. Arin caught it immediately, the same tightening in his chest he'd learned to recognize as the prelude to trouble.
What happened?
He asked.
Another rogue has resurfaced.
Rudra said quietly.
Different from Kalbhairav. More inventive.
Inventive, how?
No bodies,
Rudra replied.
only blood, clothing, personal effects left behind with surgical precision, as though the absence itself is the message.
Arin felt the familiar spark ignite, the pull of a story that refused to be ignored.
And you need us.
I do.
Rudra said simply.
Both of you.
Rhea didn't hesitate. She reached for her keys without looking at Arin, trusting him to follow. And he did, grabbing his jacket with a smile that carried equal parts resignation and anticipation.
Life was getting boring anyway.
Rudra nodded once, satisfied. And once you see the truth, you don't get to unsee it. And that's where we'll stop for tonight. Some stories end with answers. Others leave you with choices. The kind that don't feel lighter once they're made. If this story unsettled you, if it made you question who the monster really was, that's not an accident. Beyond the veil, justice doesn't always mean exposure. And sometimes protecting the world means deciding what it doesn't get to know. If you felt drawn into this story, you can support the channel by liking, sharing, and subscribing. It helps these tales reach the listeners who might already sense that there's more happening around them than meets the eye. More stories will follow when they're ready to be told. Until then, thank you for listening. for staying with the quiet moments, and for trusting me to guide you here. I'm Ipsha. This was Vixen Beyond the Veil. Take care of yourself. And when you're ready, you can step back into the world.